Hello, Simone. I'm excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be discussing a few topics. One is on how the far left have begun to attack and see interracial marriages and interracial humans as an inherently racist concept.
The far
Um,
left? Wait,
yeah,
hold on.
I don't know if you know this, Simone. This happened a few years ago because it's one of the things we're going to be talking about this. But did you know that D&D no longer allows characters to create mixed race characters?
Wait, so
Um,
like an elf can't marry an orc or a
no such
dwarf?
thing as half elf. No, so you can have a character that is technically a half elf, i.e., their mom is an elf, but the husband's a human.
Okay.
But they can only have the traits of either elves or humans. They can't have the traits of both. So basically, you have to choose one of your parents, and that's your real ethnicity. Like this is considered less offensive than being mixed race. And we're going to be going over this incident that happened a few years ago because I think it's actually interesting in that it explains the psychology of how they think race mixing is okay and how they think it's not okay. And we'll be going into quotes from famous Democratic politicians and media figures, basically attacking the concept of mixed race marriages.
God, what?
And on top of all that, I think that this is interesting to discuss, not from a haha, look at them, they're the racist now perspective, like anybody who's saying knows that. It's more interesting to study from sort of the anthropological perspective of what is racism mean today to sane people? What does it mean to Democrats? Where do we go societally and where are they going societally in terms of their understanding of race? And
Oh,
it's where
crap.
I will be laying out a new concept, which I would say is what we are, which I'd call post-racist, or if you want a longer term for it, post-scientific racist, which is to say, I think that the way that we should relate to ethnicities and racial groups as a society
Mhm.
is to, and this is what I would say is the position of the post-racist, right? Rather
Um,
than the anti-racist,
uh-huh.
is to say that, there are differences between groups. What those differences are might be hard to quantify, but like you shouldn't like or freak out just because somebody's like, this group is different from this group, because when you do, you can lead to really systemic damage to some populations. Like, for example, a lot of Black women are completely unaware that they have, I think it's 50% higher rate of pregnancy complications and early pregnancy terminations than white women do. And so they don't take, because they've been grown up told you're biologically exactly like a white woman. And so they don't make and take this into account when they're planning their fertility window, which is why when you're looking at Americans who are over the bottom, I want to say like 20% of income, Blacks have the lowest fertility rate, because the Black people who like plan, go to school, everything like that, they are unaware that their biology is going to make this harder for them than it is in their white and Asian friends. Then you've got the problem of, so we don't do that, but we accept our differences and we value our differences. Like humanity is good because we are diverse, and it is through that diversity that we can challenge things and learn from each other, right? Like our first thought, both the wokes and the racists do this, as we pointed out before, is when they see a group out competing them. And I laid out this theory before, but it's a very important theory to understand. When you're talking about differences between groups, i.e., this group has more money or more political power or more success than this group, there are only three explanations for that. One explanation is cultural differences, one explanation is genetic differences, and the other explanation is they put some sort of something systemic into practice that basically cheats the system in their favor.
Mhm.
And the problem is that when you say that groups are not culturally different, and anybody who says that certainly believes groups aren't genetically different, it means you assume all differences are due to somebody cheating. And this is as true when BLM says that they've been cheated by white populations as it is when white supremacists say that the Jews cheated them. It's a toxic similarity between these two groups.
For sure.
The
This
post-racist
on
sees
memory.
this and says, I won't fall for that. I will admit that some groups can create systemic biases in their favor, as Simone
Yeah,
talked about, like Vietnamese nail salons and stuff like that, cartels.
and
And
the Patel motels, etcetera. Yeah.
yeah. And that sometimes a society can, even through slavery or something, create dramatic systemic advantages for certain groups.
Mhm.
But that it is important to focus on cultural differences, and eventually, when it's within the realm of things we can control, genetic differences,
Mhm.
just as much. The reason why we don't focus much on genetic differences right now is it's just not something you could do much about. So being
Yeah.
aware that it exists is different. And note here, I have made no claims about differences in, say, IQ between ethnic groups.
Mhm.
We have never ever said that, and we won't say that. But I want to go into the D&D thing because I think it's interesting, and then we're going to go into quotes where
This
people
is so
are
crazy
getting
though.
into
Just like the very premise that you set out is so blowing my mind because I grew up believing that racism was, I hate this group or this group is bad. And now I'm realizing that all the racism that people are being accused of, like within our social networks, is how dare you recognize genetic differences, which is insane. But then also,
Yeah.
the only groups I know of that are like, this group is evil are the ones saying, are you ashamed of your white privilege?
Yeah.
Which is so crazy.
We had
Okay.
somebody ask us that a couple days ago. That's why this is top of mind.
Okay, go on though. This is just blowing my mind because I had always thought that like the racism that, you know, like the definition of racism is always like, oh, it hasn't changed, but like, man, it really
It has
has.
changed. And I think we need a new definition for whatever wokes are. Because I think you can just call them racist, but they're kind of something new that has the qualities that would have been defined as racist in the 90s or whatever. But of course, they won't accept that label. So what can we call them? I don't know. You can think of some new term for this as we go through this other than just post-racist.
Chime in the comments.
But Wizards of the Coast, the company that publishes the official materials of the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons, is planning to eliminate the half-elf, half-orc races in forthcoming editions. They say the half-elf construct is inherently racist, according to game designers. By the way, I'm reading from Reason here. This is them talking here. Frankly, we are not comfortable and haven't been for years with any of the options that start with half, said Jeremy Crawford, a D&D rules designer, at a virtual event last weekend. To play D&D, it's necessary to design characters with specific race, human, elf, dwarf, gnome, etc., and specific class, ranger, barbarian, cleric, etc. The official materials offer guidance for doing so. The races and classes have specific characteristics. Elves have long natural lifespans, orcs can see in the dark, and so on. But players can also make a character with mixed racial traits. Half elves are characters with one human parent and one elf parent. Half orcs are characters with one human parent and one orc parent. While it's possible to design other mixed race characters, again, official materials make it clear that everyone can do whatever they want. These two combinations are specifically listed ones, and they have their own traits. Well, not anymore, according to several reports from D&D players who witnessed the event. The official materials are dropping these classes due to concerns of inherent racism. Players who want a mixed character will be advised to choose one race from which to draw their traits. So,
Is this the same for like rangers and barbarians?
no, a ranger is a class, not a race.
Oh, sorry. I'm bad at this.
Elves, humans, okay? And
Okay.
then okay.
I don't know nothing about this D&D.
So the game will prompt you to either have elf or human to round out your game-related qualities.
Okay.
And this is what I find so interesting because I really want to dive into this because I think it's fascinating. So to go into the mechanics here, for gameplay, select one species as your quote-unquote primary heritage.
Primary.
You gain all the traits and features of that subrace lineage options.
This reminds me so much of how like when people have mixed race heritage, it's super common in modern culture for like, let's say you have like Obama, right? White mom, black dad. He's still like the first black president.
Well, so I think that's part of where this comes from. So let's talk about this. There's the hilarious South Park ad that's an ad for 23andMe to find out what % victim you are. But basically, what this is codifying.
I thought I was just a standard white guy, but DNA in me showed that I'm actually 4.2% Cherokee Indian.
Turns out I'm not totally white. I'm also part Northern Asian and even some Kurdish. I'm a victim of oppression.
People made fun of me for being French. DNA in me showed I was 8% Navajo. Nobody's making fun of me now, or my people, who are victims.
I'm 13% victim.
I'm 21% victim.
Into D&D, is you get to choose any one part of your heritage, no matter how small it is,
Mhm.
and 100% identify as that portion of your heritage.
That's totally how
without
people do, though, unless they choose to be,
Pocahontas,
cat.
Elizabeth Warren. No,
Yeah.
it's how wokes do. It's not how I think productive individuals do.
Yeah,
I
for
don't think it's
sure.
how a healthy society works.
Yeah.
But what's also really fascinating is within a D&D world, nobody argues that orcs and elves and humans and dwarves do not have different biological features. Like, nobody's going to argue that an elf has the strengths of an orc,
Yeah.
right? Nobody's I think historically, a few people would argue that, a human has the innate skill for metalworking that a dwarf has.
Yeah.
And so this is accepted within in any sort of fantasy world, right? And so they're not denying when they draw the offspring of, say, a human and an orc, that offspring is not going to, by any sane measure of the imagination, beat any human in an arm wrestle, for example.
Yeah.
But they say that we have to pretend that that's not the case, that we have to pretend that they are either just as strong as an orc or just as weak as a human. And
so that's how your stats come out. If you choose to identify, if you're half orc, half human, and you choose to identify as human, does that mean like your stats in the game are
yes, your stats are what you identify as.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel like when people choose their identities, it does affect their outcome, even if it's like, not their chosen identity.
But it's not just around ethnicity here.
Okay.
But obviously this has a lot of parallels to the trans community and stuff like that. Like this idea that you can look at, Strongman from South Park and you can be like, obviously that sports competition isn't fair. Like I can see Leah Thomas, right? That was the one who did the competition.
The swimmer.
Yeah, I can see that she has dramatically more muscle mass than I have ever seen on a biological woman.
Treating the world the way it's supposed to be, which is once you choose to identify as, in the correct world, Leah Thomas would have begun to suck at swimming when she transitioned. The problem is that reality is just unjust.
I actually love, like, I'm imagining, like, in D&D, that the half orc like joins the weightlifting competition and it's like, but I identify with my human parents. Like, what are you talking about?
This being like this whole subplot of how like half orcs and half elves are like exploiting human competition realms.
Yeah, they're like, everything. It's not on my stat blocks. Look at my stats. No, I'm actually imagining here. There's like isekai where you're taken to like a video game world.
Yeah.
Except like woke racists are enforcing this way of doing the rules on everyone, and like obviously it's not working. And you have like orcs identifying as elves to like go into like elf weightlifting competitions.
Yes.
And like elves identifying as orcs to go into their like gymnastics competitions.
But you just know that like in these fantasy worlds, then like the racism or I don't know, speciesism, whatever, would be like so much stronger than it already is.
No, but that's what's so okay. So this is why I found this so telling before we go into all these instances is you and I are here and we look at something like the trans people in sports or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And we're like, I have eyes. Is it that these people don't have eyes? Is it that these people like cannot make a basic biological judgment here, right?
I have a lot of incredible trans friends who are athletes, and so we're all inspired. This woman's competing.
She's not exactly your average trans athlete.
Well, what is an average trans athlete? Honestly, I find that kind of bigoted, David.
Okay.
Now that I can compete as female, I'm ready to smash the other girls. I'm gonna roll up the other women here, and I'm gonna smoke them. I am the strongest woman this state has ever seen.
But, so I look at that and I'm like, surely, maybe it's just that we're not dimorphic enough, right? But what you see within the D&D example, which is really, really fascinating and helps elucidate the way they actually see ethnic groups, you see that, no, even if it was so patently obvious that no one could conceivably deny it, i.e. the half orc or something like that, right? they would still choose to deny it. Keep in mind, this Wizard of the Coast team, it got through like an entire diversity like review board, right? Like to us,
of course it did. But wait, hold on. Is this a
I know
logistical
you
thing?
say, of course it did, but to me, outside of the woke mob and circles and everything like that, I hear about this and I'm thinking, that's obviously racist, right? To ban, like,
no, it's just how it's supposed to be. It's just how it's supposed to be. So they're like, it's
right.
correct.
But it shows the way that they want to apply this within our own reality as well, and that it is well enough conceived that this idea of, even though they look like a man, even though they have the muscle of a man,
yeah, they're not a man. They're not a man. And they have the stats of a woman.
So I think that matters in terms of that way of relating to race, right? Like race is, while sort of being transracial is still something like Rachel Dolezal or whatever, who like pretended to be black and had like no black heritage. Like this is something that's still really looked down upon. The idea of pretending or taking ownership of an ethnic group is, I think, way more flexible in progressive circles than we pretend it is on the right, or that they pretend it is.
A quick logistical question for people like me who are outside that haven't ever played D&D. Could this have just been a logistical constraint? Like it's just too hard for dungeon masters to, or like for players in general, to set up a stat sheet that's mixed?
They said why. Look, I literally read their quotes about this, Simone.
I know, but maybe they did that for like social points within their leftist circles, because this has been dominated by leftist factions, but in the end, it was just a logistical thing.
To have more diversity for like min-maxing stats and everything.
Okay.
So this was very explicitly done for diversity reasons, to be on the woke side of history.
Because before you could mix them, right?
Yes, it was normal.
So this it wasn't a problem that was being fixed. Because at first I was like, well, maybe
5 editions it wasn't a problem. No.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, I don't know, maybe you have to like add numbers and then average them out, and it just takes too much time, and that diversity.
No, the set stats for half elves, half orcs, they're all given. Like
they were just God. Okay, so you just look it up.
This is even something additional they can sell because it's more pages in their book.
Dude, you're right. Okay. Sorry, that was necessary. I didn't know that. Now thank you for telling me.
Okay, so wait, what was the point I was making when you interrupted me? I remember the point. It was very important, so I'm glad I didn't forget it. The second one is this applies even to ethnic group, with only one exception among wokes. So here, people are like, oh, you can't just say that you're black was in woke circles, right? And I'd be like, actually, you can, as long as you can pass as having any meaningful black heritage. So if an individual, for example, was in woke circles, was, let's say, 1/8 black or something like that, and they said, I'm black, and you said, if you're anything other than like obviously blacker than them, no, you're not black, you don't look black, you don't pass as black, this would be seen as an incredibly offensive thing to say within their circles. And I've noticed as well within woke circles that this becomes a particularly easy way to get the BIPOC background by claiming Native American heritage, because you may not look Native American, and so you can claim it, or by claiming Latinx heritage, because nobody knows, Latinx white people are Latinx, right? Like you're from Argentina or whatever, right?
Yeah, you could be like literally 100% Italian. And
Mitt Romney is Latinx, right? Like
he is.
His parents were Mexicans, weren't they? Google it. I'm pretty sure they were. So he's more Latinx than most wokies, right? And if he said, I'm Latinx, and you tried to challenge him on this, and you are to the right of him, you get immediately dogpiled. So I think that this is really important to note, that when they say that we haven't entered this sort of, I can identify as whatever race I want, we actually are already well in the I can identify as whatever race I want, with the only caveat that it gets tricky when you're identifying as black. And you probably want some small amount of heritage from that group. But it's considered very offensive to question individuals because they don't, quote unquote, pass, which was the point historically. The reason why you would sometimes identify somebody as, say, black, even though they would have, a half white or a white parent, right, is you'd say, well, they looked black enough that they experienced all the oppression that goes
people saw them as black, and therefore
so this is where this logic started. but it's no longer there anymore. You can very clearly pass as a white European and claim Latinx heritage or claim Black heritage is what I've seen. So we got to talk about, that, right? Like identities are choice now. But the second thing is how they relate to ethnic heritage, which I think is really important.
Okay.
Because clearly here, the reason they're uncomfortable with this is in their heads, which, by the way, was not the case for me. In my head, I never understood orcs to be Black people, okay? But in their head, if they're like, well, it's offensive that, half orcs exist, then they're saying that these are like ethnic groups and not like species, right? And as such, they're saying that they always were kind of uncomfortable, one, with ethnic group mixing, but two, with the idea that you could inherit some traits from one ethnic group and some traits from another ethnic group.
Now, okay, I'm sorry. I just need, for me and all the other non-D&D people, I know that orcs from the Lord of the Rings universe are sort of, you could say genetically modified or are modified through treatments, elves. So,
That's
genetically.
not true in D&D.
Okay, so they're in D&D, they're just this
You
separate
have
evolved.
mentioned this a number of times that you think is a universal true thing about orcs, and it is literally only Tolkien.
Like the Lord of the Rings universe is pretty big.
Literally, only the Lord of the Rings universe orcs are like that. That is never.
Okay.
Maybe people will school me and there'll be like one other mainstream fantasy world, but it is not a common factor of orcs.
Well, thank you. I needed to know that. Because I
far
wasn't sure. I was like, it's weird to, yeah.
By far the most common trope of orcs, even in the late 80s, was like noble savages. Like they were very tribal, they were very savage, but they, upheld honor and everything like that.
Like the Reavers of the fantasy world.
No, I said noble savages.
Oh, noble. So like structured and not crazy.
Yes, they're often structured like sort of like Native American tribes and stuff like that when they're doing them.
Okay, so like closer to the earth, less in their high towers and
yes.
Okay, I gotcha. All right, gotcha. Thanks.
Yes, and so this has been a thing for a while. But anyway, the point here being is
sorry.
Yes, you go on big tangents.
I need to know. I don't. Yeah.
How do you watch so little fantasy? Because
I do the work. I pay the bills.
Thank you for that, Simone. I really appreciate it. But the point here being is that they think that ethnicity is something that you choose and you choose one. And you're not really supposed to choose two. And this is true within woke circles for mixed race individuals. I even see, and you can sound off in the comments here, some shaming when people attempt to combine traditions from both of their parents.
Well, it is the urban monoculture, to be fair.
Yeah, it's adopt one identity so I'm not confused about your position in our social hierarchy. And that identity is sort of like your personal branding or whatever, and unrelated to your biological reality, which is really interesting. And I think that is part of what the modern, I guess we'll call it woke racism, is, instead of the post-racism, because right now it's dealing with like the reason we use the term post-racism is because usually for people to sort of enter a post-racist mindset and be like, it's okay that we're different, you have to go through learning about those differences, accepting those differences, and then understanding that they're just not that important with the current genetic technology that we have, coming down the pipeline. And that this is okay, that it is, diversity wouldn't have value if we weren't actually different, right? If everyone was interchangeable with everyone else, there would be no reason to say that diversity is a thing of value, be that cultural or genetic diversity. And so, and I think that is, as you said about this, you're like, it's sort of like Dune, the pain box, right? You must face your racism and let it pass through you. That is where you go to enter a truly non-racist world. It is through all of the threats that come with traditional racism. Because if you refuse to engage with those threats, you end up in this alternate crazy world where every group difference is because somebody's cheating, and therefore any group that is outcompeting your group must be destroyed. And this always leads to things like anti-Semitism and stuff like that.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying that an idea is bad because it leads to anti-Semitism. An idea may lead to anti-Semitism and be perfectly valid. I'm just arguing to the wokes who sometimes care about anti-Semitism that this mindset is always going to take you there. Or to, our Reform Jew viewers who think that staying on the left side is still a good idea. It's like, no. If you promote this ideology, it ends with your group being targeted. But it leads with any group this have competing. But yeah. I want to now get to, do you have any thoughts on this before we go further, Simone?
No, dive deeper. This just, my mind was already blown at the very beginning of this when I realized that, racism was totally different from what I thought it was as a kid.
So this is Representative Jasmine Crockett, a Democrat in Texas, who was talking in 2025 about Brian Donalds, a black man. And she's a member of the squad. So, very prominent, right? And she said that his marriage to a white woman, quote unquote, whitewashes him, making him less authentically black.
So he feels like a race traitor.
No, she says he's not really black because he married a white woman. He doesn't get to claim to be black. See, this is the thing about the left.
Whoa, okay.
This is an elected politician this year said this, not like
because he married outside his what? That is, how can she?
So what's interesting is, remember how I said that like they can identify as whatever they want. Like if Elizabeth Warren wants to identify as Native American, that's not offensive from a Democrat's perspective, right? But if you are not a Democrat and if you are not within the urban monoculture, if you challenge it, then people within the urban monoculture get to identify what you are. And that's what we're seeing here, right?
No.
Shared by @RobTheBuilder, a self-described liberal. He warned of, and I've seen these in the wild as well, warning of fetishization when he was talking about how white women in woke circles scrutinize interracial relationships as exploitative. He dated a dark-skinned Indian woman last summer, but she was repeatedly warned by white liberal acquaintances who didn't know him that his interest was likely a racial fetish or tokenization to signal virtue. And the quote from his he goes, on 3 separate occasions from 3 different people, she was warned that my attraction to her was likely either a fetish and or tokenization, whatever that means.
That is so weird. Is this because there are now prominent conservatives who are in mixed race marriages, and now
a lot of prominent conservatives are in mixed race marriages?
Yeah.
But keep in mind that this never it doesn't matter when, as the classic, incredibly anti-white, black progressive woman marries Jewish guy trope. Yeah, and we point out, if you look at the conservatives, the ones that they're always saying are racist, like JD Vance will be like married to a Indian woman, right? Indian kids, right? You see this all the time, right? Like they clearly don't mean whatever we used to mean by racist when they're calling him a racist, right? They're talking about some new distinction. And so I'm trying to categorize these 2 new systems of thought, post-racism and woke racism, as the diametrically opposed, instead of both schools pointing out ways in which each one of them is more like what we historically called racism in the 90s. And I will agree that some parts of post-racism are closer to what we called racism in the 90s than woke racism, but overall woke racism is way closer. I'd say it's like 80% towards woke racism in terms of whatever we called racism in the 90s.
Because my memory of 90s racism was totally okay with accepting genetic differences. In fact, there was a celebration of the variety of humans. And it was like, we're different. And isn't that cool? And isn't it cool that this person isn't like you and has different culture and heritage? And our strength is in that variety. So
let's keep going here.
Okay.
In a paper titled The Marriage Fundamentalist Guide to the End of the World, Occidental College sociology professor Lisa Wade, a prominent voice in gender and racial studies often cited in progressive academia, argued that marriage itself reinforces, quote, white heteropatriarchal supremacy, end quote.
Oh, that's why she calls it a marriage fundamentalist. Wow.
Yeah. Representatives Brian Donalds highlighted it in his response, tying it to criticism of his own interracial marriage, as left-leaning commentators used it to question the legitimacy of his mixed race unions under systemic racism. And then quote here, marriage fundamentalism, like structural racism, is a key in structuring element of white patriarchal supremacy, end quote.
Heteropatriarchal supremacy.
Yeah, in a widely discussed essay, journalist Paul Kicks, in An Interracial Marriage Was a Black Woman, described a shift in liberal attitudes post-2020. So I note here this has also been recent, which is pretty interesting. At a neighborhood gathering, a white progressive mother questioned his fitness to raise their biracial children, reflecting woke weariness about white partners in mixed-race families, and a heightened focus on racial supremacy of color. He said, quote, "I don't know how you can raise Black children right now," end quote. And this was in the essay, the Free Press essay, "Liberals Once Embraced Interracial Marriages Like Mine, What Changed?" And we might do a separate episode where we just go over this essay because I think that sounds pretty interesting. But I think that this is true. Like, if you believe in racial supremacy, right? Like that Black people are genuinely superior or more fragile or more like somehow needing of a different class of parents, like you would look at the white person raising them and be like, how can you be good enough to be the parent to these Black?
But if it's a mixed race, that means that person's genetics is also in their kid, and
Not
they're the
way
best
they
person.
see it. And that's what's really fascinating, right?
so
That's where the
bizarre.
D&D thing comes in. These children are only Black in these people's minds. And not only that, but these children would have the right to, and are expected to. The reason why they're like, the father should be ashamed and not the mother, is because they expect the kids to choose their Black identity and not their white identity.
This is shockingly regressive. I cannot believe it.
It's not good. Like, we are fighting against true evil here. Like, I want to be clear, right? These are not like, there's some good to it and there's some bad to it. But I think that there is good in trying to delineate what they believe and better understand what they believe about what race really is and how your race is really determined.
I suppose.
Okay. At Youngos3, a verified ex-user in queer and leftist communities, critiqued the framing of interracial relationships, often white plus non-white, as progressive symbols. They argued these dynamics historically benefited white men and aren't truly emancipatory. So here's the quote. 1, interracial relationships are not inherently progressive. 2, miscegenation laws were historically introduced by white men. Ending them was done primarily to benefit white men. 3, interracial is almost synonymous with white plus other.
No, it's not.
But this is what they think. This is not something that he gets pushed back on. You know, this is normal
it's just
in these
stated without
communities and stuff like that, right? And I think that this is why we also need something other than scientific racism, which I'm quite against. Scientific racism is to say, you know, racial groups are genetically quite distinct from each other, and this significantly matters to the way we structure society, and that it is important to understand often, you know, as a sidebar to this, which groups are the good ones and which ones are the bad ones. And you know, some scientific racists will be like, I don't do that third thing. And it's like, you know, a lot of people in the community do, right? Like, you know, they do, right? And I think that that's not a healthy way. And that's why I opt into this post-racist category, where you have gone through that understanding and you've come out at a more logical endpoint than a racial obsession, either in the form of scientific racism or in the form of leftism, modern woke racism. So what was I going to find some other fun ones here? Oh yes, let's do Robin DiAngelo. What did she have to say?
She's still doing stuff? Haven't heard that name for a long time.
Yeah. So she said, and then I'm a big believer in affinity space and affinity work. And I think people of color need to get away from white people and have some community with each other.
Bring back segregation.
Bring back segregation, yes. Yazang Pong, an anti-racist narratives in interracial marriages. This was August 2022, and this is discussed a lot that year. So in Psychology Today, a mainstream progressive-leaning psychology outlet, this PhD, an academic and an interracial couple herself, highlights how post-2020 anti-racist activism frames white partners as inherent oppressors. This narrative, drawn from figures like Ibram X. Kennedy and Robin DiAngelo, questions the authenticity of mixed-race unions. And so she said, why would oppressed persons want to marry their oppressors? And if these activists are right, wouldn't we have to conclude that no authentic relationship could exist between white and non-white people?
Maybe because these aren't oppressed people marrying their oppressors, because slavery was abolished a while ago. Maybe.
I know, and then people will be like, well, it hasn't been enough time for them to catch up. And I'm like, well, then why do Japanese Americans out-earn white Americans? Like,
Yeah,
the
despite
camps were
internment.
much more recently. And you could be like, well, that wasn't as long. And I'm like, well, it still re-zeroed them. You know, so and then people can be like, well, see, the thing is you're not taking into account the cultural effects of X many years of slavery. And he goes, right there, the cultural effects. So that means that it can be addressed intra-communitally. It doesn't need to be enforced from the outside. And if anything, watch the other episode we're going to have releasing around this. If you do handouts, whether it's DEI or whether it is in terms of cash handouts, you usually hurt the community in question. And there was a great study on this that showed that if you're looking at, and note here, I'm not saying for genetic reasons, it's just everybody knows, well, not everybody knows, but like if you're aware of like the research into discrimination and everything like that, Black students in America score lower than white students and earn less than white individuals. This is also true for Latin Americans. And if you're like, okay, where are these differences the smallest and where are they the biggest? They're the biggest in Democratic areas and they are the smallest in Republican areas. So that means that when you have intergenerational Republican leadership, you get less distance between ethnic groups, meaning more equality, but that's because you're getting less DEI and less handouts, which increase these things. See our DEI videos on this. Anyway, so to continue here, sociologist Sarisha Sylvan-Cole research published by Rice University, a progressive academic institution, argues that mixed-race marriages don't inherently challenge racism and can even reinforce it through colorblind assumptions. Progressive media outlets like the Guardian amplified this in 2023 to 2024 when they were getting called mad at us, and caution viewing interracial unions as a solution to systemic issues, potentially stigmatizing them as performative. Yeah, I performatively got married and had kids with somebody for my entire life. I mean, I'm not going to argue it never happens, but like, I don't think that like JD Vance,
like the political lesbians of race warriors.
Yeah. So as a quote here, interracial couples often serve as proof that we are indeed making positive liberal advancements, particularly when they have children. But this presumption can undermine the racism of the extended family members who encounter the couple.
So, based on what are they even asserting that? I mean, first, when you actually look at the data, mixed race marriages are at a higher rate in the United States, at least today, than they ever have been historically. They're becoming increasingly common. And the other really important piece of data here too, which I think is just so important and so telling, is that, say what you will about gold diggers, it's actually very unusual for people to marry outside their educational wealth or whatever status class. So the fact that there are more mixed race marriages, to me, says that there is less of a functionally perceived and felt barrier between people of different racial backgrounds, that they are seeing themselves as in the same class because we are really entering a post-race world. And that they're trying to go back.
Well, I think, Simone, it's important to remember that in a modern context, white supremacy has a big over diversity problem. It is just too diverse a movement, the white supremacist movement.
Oh.
We need to there's too many Black and Indians in it, and it needs a cleaning, because I have seen, leftists complain about this a lot recently, is the problem with all the diversity in the white supremacist movement. But it's a joke, because the people who the left frame as white supremacists, who are not white supremacists, they're just not woke racists, And again, the reason I make up this post-racist label is it is a very different view about race than the race realists have. And it's a very different view about race than being against racism what is in the 90s. Because I think in the 90s, there was still this sort of underlying fear of being like, it's okay to admit that people are different from each other.
Yeah.
And
that our differences are strengths. They're good things.
That diversity would have no value if no human group was actually different from any other human group. We would be interchangeable. There wouldn't be a reason to think of groups differently. There'd be no reason to say, oh, we need X many of X type of person in this office for maximum. It's like, well, apparently all men and women are completely interchangeable. You know?
Except they aren't, and stay in your lane and don't ever pretend to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's about accepting reality, and what they're doing, which is really interesting. And I think we see from the D&D is that race has become an optional identity in the same way that they've kind of done this with sexuality, where really anyone on the left can identify with, well, pretty much any sexuality they want.
Yeah.
They get to, you can be like, well, they can't identify as gay. And it's like, well, they can identify as a woman and now they're gay, you know? Yeah.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, you can. Yeah, there you go.
So sexuality doesn't matter anymore. You know, arousal patterns don't matter anymore. What you're actually born doesn't matter anymore. It's all a choice. And what's interesting is that this whole mindset around this all being a choice is downstream of an imperialist and European descended culture, which is one of the things I always point out about. And by that, what I mean is when you point out, they're like, well, I love Muslims. And I go, well, you know, Muslims in Pakistan have a lot of views that you're going to disagree with. And they're like, well, one day they'll agree with all my views because we will eradicate what makes their culture distinct.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's always really hilarious to me. But anyway, any thoughts, Simone, before we close out here?
I'm just horrified. I can't.
But I mean, it is so mainstream that this is D&D now. This is Wizard of the Coast. This is the world we live in now.
It doesn't. It only makes the game more boring. You've just taken out.
Nobody got fired over this. No big uprising happened. Just.
But I mean, you had more choices in the past.
Yes, you did have more choices. Society was more interesting. I mean, it's also like outside of D&D, it's not just stupid. It's unproductive. It's stupid, unproductive, and it is sort of anti-reality. And it's
what shocks me even more, though, is
like, bro, you know, I've said I suspect there to be, as people begin to realize that the mainstream right now is like, I might be naming post-racism, or other people might have named it already, but or post-scientific racism, I think is a sort of good full term for it. But it is the normative position within the online right now. It is the normative position among youth these days, if you talk to them, who are not woke brainwashed. It is not like our position that we're trying to convince you of. I'm sure the vast majority of our listeners, when they hear this term, they're like, oh yeah, that describes my view of this concept. And it's a view that's just sort of like, believe the evidence, but don't be a spaz about it and start like overly building your life around it.
Basically, yeah.
In the same way that, you know, when people are like, well, you know, if X group was really better at X or Y, would that not change your daily decisions? It's like anybody who's done like a 23andMe or like a genetics poll, because that poll said that you were supposed to be good at something, did you decide to like change your life based on that? Were you like, oh, this poll says I'm going to be really good at coding. I guess I'm going to leave my job and become a coder, even though I don't like coding. No, you still do what you want to do. Like, it matters so little. And this is where I always talk about when people are like, oh, well, you know, if you knew that you had X predilection, like that would be really dangerous. People ask us about us with our kids, you know, because we get them genetically sequenced. And I'm like, you never freaked out about people's horoscopes. And these people believe this. So how is this any different? Anyway. I know I love that, like, far woke women, they will be like, there is no difference between these two, you know, very distinct cultural and ethnic groups. And then I'm like, well, you know, I was born on X month. And they're like, oh, you're a Scorpio? Well, this relationship will never work. Like, it's so weird. Actually, like, I just want to be like, it's so weird that we are like discriminating on race. People will freak the F out. But if you discriminate based on zodiac signs, people are like, that's totally normal. Like, oh, I won't date Aries, obviously. How is that better?
Yeah, it's not.
Have you ever recognized that before?
Yeah, but it's acceptable because it's not race. It's It's the month in which you were born, which you also have no control over.
But fortunately, we now can discriminate on race. It's been said, they laid it out. There's just some rules for how you do it.
Yeah. Rule number 1: do not be white.
No, you can be white as long as you're a Democrat.
No,
Democrat?
you still have to be ashamed of your white privilege.
Oh yeah, you just have to say I'm ashamed of it, but you're
and then find something else to you're like you have POTS and you're trans and or non-binary and or suffering from severe mental disorders, etc. Spoonie something. Anyway, I'm gonna go get the kids. I'm gonna make your bulldog for dinner.
Did you look at the video on how they're cooked?
I'm going to look at it right before I cook them, but I'm going to cook them before I start the cooking, sauteing the rice cakes, so they're totally cooked, and then I'll reintegrate them when I start simmering everything.
I think they can go in with the chicken.
Okay, when I put in the chicken, yeah, I will do that.
Or maybe like just after the chicken.
Yeah, that's the plan. All right. I love you so much, and thanks for
so much.
horrifying me just when I think things can't get any crazier. You blow my mind, so thanks for that.
The world we're in.
So it goes. You're so pretty.
So for dinner tonight, are we doing the massive, because she's about to give birth, right? And so she'll be out for a while. And so she wants to make like all of my favorite dishes in mass so they can be frozen. So
and then easily reheated. So I want Malcolm to still eat delicious homemade food. Like what was it? Burmese mint chicken that I made. In this case, I'm making bulldog fire chicken, Korean fire chicken. But I won't have the bandwidth to prepare it. So we're going to make it ahead of time. And it's going to be perfect. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Except here's actually Malcolm's trick to bulldog, which I think is very interesting. He basically wants to eat it like pizza without any carbs, because as much as he performatively is someone who has terrible health, he actually has an intermittent fasting, mostly keto diet. It's so weird.
This is pomegranate juice, by the way.
Yeah, no, you're like, you would never admit it, but you actually like.
No, but the bulldog, it's supposed to be eaten that way. Bulldog is not eaten with rice.
It's not eaten with rice. It has those Korean like starchy rice chunks in it. But the way that Malcolm likes it is normally bulldog is like kind of layered, like in a a dish, like it's a little deep. You spoon into it, or chopstick into it. But what Malcolm wants it to do is like basically when I prepare it, like just spread it out very thinly in like a pie dish or on a baking sheet, and then layer mozzarella cheese on top of it like a pizza, this is how it is traditionally done. Typically it does have a top layer of mozzarella cheese. And then he eats it like that, basically like a crustless chicken and gochujang sauce, like cheese pizza, which is really interesting. And I get it. Like it maximizes the sort of pizza flavor without the empty carbs. Because honestly, yeah, I mean, I freaking love deep dish pizza crust. I love the flakiness.
Also like spicier and sweeter than a pizza. And the carbs,
there is sugar in it, or honey,
are better because there's less diversity in them. Like with a pizza, you got to get the crust just right and everything.
That's true. And who wants the crust? Even when they fill the crust with cheese in an attempt to redeem it, which I appreciate, it's still crust. It's still crust. But you know what? I actually appreciate that even Koreans kind of inherently and intuitively understand this, because all of their pizzas are like, don't worry, we've put hot dogs in the crust. Don't worry, we've put like their crusts are
Korean pizzas are disgusting.
But in theory and in
theory, they look amazing. Yeah.
They look awesome. Like those little pointed, like sausage infused cheese crusts. You'd think they'd be great. I never tried a pizza when we were in Seoul because you were like, they taste so terrible. At least we had that.
Well, no, you know how terrible they taste. Did you try one of those like hot dog or corn dog things in Seoul that look really good?
Yes.
Okay. Pizza is like if you had that kind of bread and meat, but it was an entire pizza. You know, like when you taste it, you're like, this is surprisingly disgusting. Like how it looks amazing. Like you see it, like they're little glazed hot dog things.
Yeah, they have like corn dogs, but the problem is they're not corn dogs. They're made with what I could only guess is rice flour, and it's just utterly flavorless and textureless, like just starchy, just stodgy. And then you have the hot dog inside, but it's just like this. Why would you wrap I guess a hot dog bun, but it's not soft and fluffy like a hot dog bun.
Fairly flavorless compared to like a normal hot dog.
Yeah, it just like the whole thing looked so freaking good and it was so disappointing. And I'm obsessed with corn dogs. It's like one of my top pregnancy cravings. And how do you butcher that?
God, imagine being in Korea and not being able to get a good corn dog.
Seriously.
Although they have great, what do I want to call them, like croquettes, like buns and stuff.
Oh, I know. Yeah, you just go to what's that called? I was gonna say au bon pain, but no, it's that French Parisian.
Yeah, it's a French. They have it in the U.S. too, and I think people think that they're actually French, but they're
No,
Korean.
it's Korean. No, damn it, what's it called? The little
like the
Eiffel
French
Tower.
Connection or the French, I don't know, something.
The place we were thinking of is Paris Baguette. And I'm always, I look at these in American cities like in Manhattan or San Francisco, and I'm like, I wonder how many people who go here realize that this is extremely Korean. All the food here is Korean, and this is a well-known Korean chain that just didn't change its name to something like Korean Baguette when it moved to America.
No, but I love those. Yeah, so at least they're like, they can get it right. So I don't know how they can get it so wrong with pizza and corn dogs. Well, or rice dog, whatever they call them.
Yeah. And if you're not watching this, because I would have put some Korea pizzas on the screen here, you should Google Korean pizzas.
Yeah, just no, for real. Yeah. They're expensive too, though. They're pricey.
When die and I'm adult and I'm gonna take your whole room and get your TV.
Oh, you mean you get all my stuff when I die?
Yeah.
Who told you about that?
Nobody. I just figured it.
You just figured it out yourself?
Yeah.
Wait, so then are you going to try to kill me till you get my stuff?
No, you're gonna die yourself when you're a grandpa.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm done with that. You make me a grandpa and you get all my stuff, okay? Deal?